Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Christa Carmen.
And this is...
Murder Coaster.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Spooky Season October. And in honor of Christa's newest novel, How to Fake a Haunting, which was released yesterday. Huge congratulations, Christa.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
And there's a link to it in the show notes. So we will be doing ghosts all month long. And are starting with the big bad boy of them all, the Amityville Horror. Today, we will focus on the bizarre murders that rocked the sleepy little Long Island town and put it on the map. And the family annihilator himself, Ronald Joseph DeFeo Jr.
Let's begin. Prologue. Henry's Bar. On November 13th, 1974, at 1 p.m., Ronald DeFeo Jr., who went by the name Butch, left work early at the Buick dealership in Brooklyn that his grandfather owned, and his father ran. It is believed that he then drove his 1970 blue Buick Electra an hour and 20 minutes east on Highway 495 to Oyster Bay, then headed south down 135 to the village of Amityville, to his parents' house at 112 Ocean Avenue. But, like everything else in this case, even this is filled with endless speculation and debate.
But there are some facts that we do know for certain. It was a new moon, that orb in the autumn sky completely black and giving out no light. And the weather report called for wind and light rain with lows in the 40s. As Butch drove to Henry's Bar on 183 Merrick Road, just a few blocks from his parents' house on Ocean Avenue. A place he and his friends called Highs, because it was a place to get and do drugs.
Later, it would be claimed this bar was called the Witch's Brew. But again, like so much in this case, that seems to have been made up whole cloth, fabricated to make the story creepier.
According to bartender John Wendell, Butch arrived at the bar a little after 3 o'clock in the afternoon and hung around for a few hours, drinking sodas and playing pool, loudly telling fellow patrons that he was going to have to crawl in through the window of his parents' house. As the house was all locked up, he had no key, and no one was answering the phone.
Butch then went to the home of one Patty Greiger, where he scored some heroin and shot up.
At 6:30 p.m., Ronald Butch DeFeo burst back into Henry's Bar, throwing open the doors, falling to his knees, and yelling,
"Help! I think my mother and my father are shot!"
Butch's best friend, Bobby Kelsky, an out-of-work brick mason, ran to Butch, weeping hysterically, threw his arms around Bobby, crying,
Bobby, you gotta help me. Somebody shot my mother and father."
"Oh, you sure they're not asleep?"
"No, I saw them up there."
"Come on in, let's go."
Butch then stood, looked around at the bar, and said, "Come on, everybody."
4 other men leapt up and followed them outside. John Alterelli, Joey Yosowit, Al Sutton, and the owner of the bar himself, William Scortamaglia. All of them piling into Butch's Buick, Butch climbing into the back seat, presumably too distraught to drive, and his best friend Bobby driving, squealing right onto Ocean Boulevard and following Amityville Creek south, past Grace Court, and to the junction of Ocean and South Ireland Place, where the 3-story Dutch colonial home sat on a lot which backed up to Amityville Creek, leading to South Oyster Bay.
A cool wind blew autumn leaves past a wooden sign hanging from a lamppost in the yard, reading High Hopes, surrounded by kneeling figurines of children praying to a large statue of St. Joseph holding the baby Jesus.
The house had a sunroom attached to the end which faced the street, above which were 2 quarter-moon windows, which, especially when contrasted with the black shingles, looked very much like a pair of nefarious glowing eyes, giving the house the look of a malevolent jack-o'-lantern.
Bobby pulled up to the large house just as the sun was beginning to set, the scent of the creek and bay heavy in the early November chill. Bobby leapt out of the car to investigate alone. Butch still curled up in the back seat, one of the older men calling out, "Careful, someone might be in there."
"I don't care," Bobby yelled, pulling open the unlocked door to the house and entering his best friend's home.
From the kitchen came the baying wail of their sheepdog, Shaggy, who they kept tied to the kitchen door, which, come on, is sad. Poor Shaggy, all tied up in the kitchen.
Right? Poor Shaggy. And the neighbors described it as a wail, not like a bark, like a kind of sound, you know?
No.
Sad, huh?
Anyway, Bobby just burst into the house alone, fearless and brave, the others following behind him, Butch staying in the back seat of his car.
The house was dark and quiet, heavy with the scent of blood and death, as Bobby and the others charged up the steps where eerie, life-size portraits of the family hung, just like something out of the House of Usher, and then to the bedroom of Butch's parents, Ronald Sr., or Big Ronnie, and Louise DeFeo.
Bobby flicked on the light switch to see the DeFeos lying face down on their bed.
It was a weird image the light brought, surreal with the Catholic shrine set up on the bureau, votive candles and statues, everything over the top 70s glitz, fancy gold-trimmed phone, polished wood headboard, and it looks completely unnatural.
Louise is on the left side of the bed and has a blanket pulled up around her, almost as if she'd been tucked in, barely visible. And Ronald Sr., a very large man, 300 pounds, is sprawled over the sheets and blankets, up atop the pillows, his head nearly against the headboard, wearing only boxer shorts, his right foot slightly hanging off the side of the bed, a visible bullet wound in the center of his bare back, with a small trickle of blood leaking out.
Behind the headboard was a mirrored wall, which reflected the macabre image of the dead couple back.
Bobby recoiled in horror from the sight and ran out of the house to the car where Butch sat waiting.
Meanwhile, John Altorari had gone to the other bedroom across the hall and discovered Butch's little brothers, Mark, 12, and John, 9, also lying face down in their beds, each with a visible gunshot wound to the center of their backs, just like Ronald Sr., Mark with a wheelchair beside his bed, as he'd recently been injured playing football.
Joey Aswoit called the newly established 911, having to go and check the address, the operator seeming to be wondering if this was all some elaborate prank and not grasping the enormity of what he was saying.
Outside, Butch was ranting and punching the hood of his car, screaming, "Man, I'm not going back in that house."
Bobby asked him, "Who should we call?"
"Call Rocco," Butch told him.
Rocco was Butch's grandfather, who lived about 10 miles away. To be clear, this story is very New York, very 70s, very Italian, and nearly everyone is involved with the mafia in one way or the other, including the cops and Butch's grandparents, both on his mother and father's side.
This whole story is like a Sopranos Halloween special, especially if you listen to the interviews with Butch, who has a very strong
Brooklyn accent.
So at 6:40, the first police officer arrived, strolling up to Butch and his friends and asking, "Hey, so what's the problem?"
Butch, who was going from weeping hysterically to angrily screaming at the sky, looked up at the officer and yelled, "My parents are dead!"
The officer had Butch and Bobby take him into the house and wait in the breakfast nook of the kitchen while he investigated. Then the officer used the dining room telephone to call and request homicide detectives.
Another officer arrived, and it was then that Butch suddenly remembered. He had 2 sisters and told the officers to check on them.
The officers went back upstairs into the far bedroom, where they found Allison DeFeo, 13, lying face down beneath a pink blanket, shot through the head, her pillow covered in hair, blood, and brain matter, a massive pool of blood drenching the mattress and sheets.
And on the 3rd floor of the house, they found Dawn DeFeo, 18, also lying face down in bed like every other member of her family, her pillow covered in hair, blood, and brain matter.
As Butch sat weeping, one of the officers put a hand on his back and said, "Hey, take it easy, buddy."
Very quickly, the scene was overrun by police. Literally dozens of them swarming the place, alerting the neighborhood that something was going on. Word soon spreading out, the press showing up, neighbors coming to gawk and spread rumors, children darting about. A complete circus. Police having to put up barricades to keep the crowd back.
Inside the house, as police officers tromped about, Butch and Bobby sat in the breakfast nook, where a priest had somehow been brought in to console poor Butch, having him promise not to take violent actions against the people who killed his family. And then the priest was wandering up the stairs, going into the various bedrooms, performing final blessings, which, what the fuck? Why did the police allow this priest to be wandering around a crime scene, throwing holy water over everything?
That's wild. Old school shit right there. That officer noted the house, which had a heated swimming pool in the backyard, its own boathouse right on the water, and was gaudily over-decorated. Everything gold-trimmed, thick, bright red shag carpeting, seemed quite exuberant for a service manager of a car dealership. And Ronnie hinted that they were involved with the mafia.
And the cops thought that was cool that they were in the mafia. New York, in the 70s. And then the cops were all thinking, well, yeah, it must be a mob hit. And when they began questioning Butch and Bobby over who could have done something like this, the name Tony Mazzo came out.
These names are like killing me. Tony Mazzo was a notorious mafia hitman and good friend of the DeFeos, who'd actually stayed with the family for a brief time. It's mostly reported that it was Butch who volunteered this name, though he swears it was actually Bobby. Regardless, it was a complete red herring. Tony Mazzo was nowhere near Amityville, Long Island that night.
But Tony Mazzo was mad at him because apparently Butch had called him a cocksucker. And they had this terrible feud. So finally, homicide detectives arrive on the scene, having to push through reporters and rubberneckers and children and old ladies. And there's footage of the scene with those haunting eyes of the house staring down. It was total bedlam. And when detectives get inside the house, they're like, what the fuck? Why are all these people in here? Why is a priest wandering around throwing holy water? 2 possible suspects still on the scene. Everybody get the fuck out. You know, the crime scene was probably totally ruined at this point.
Yeah, I can't imagine it wasn't. And detectives were a little bit different with their attitude toward old Butch than the uniformed officers had been.
Yeah, the police had been sympathetic and friendly, kissing his ass and asking him about his mob ties. The detectives, they coldly told Bobby to buzz off and told Butch he was coming with them to the station.
Butch started crying that he didn't want to go anywhere, that he wanted to talk to his grandfather, and a detective grabbed him by the face, unsnapped his pistol, and said,
"I told you we're going to the police station. It'll be better for you there."
As they forcefully shuffled him to their car, Rocco DeFeo, Butch's grandfather, was there in the crowd, watching, and sent Bobby up to the detectives, who asked, "Where you taking Butch?"
"Hey, don't worry about it."
What exactly happened after this is constantly debated. Police claim Butch confessed and told them where to find bloody clothing and shell casings in a sewer in Brooklyn, and the murder weapon tossed into the Amityville Bay.
But none of these interrogations were recorded. There was no signed confession, and detectives didn't even take notes as they questioned him, and he was junk sick for nearly 30 hours straight.
Butch claimed he was beaten, starved, bullied, and threatened into a false confession, given while he was withdrawing from heroin, and that it wasn't him who told police where the gun was, but his best friend, Bobby Kelsky.
And of course, over the years, Butch DeFeo would change his story constantly.
He'd say he'd heard voices telling him to kill his family, and a dark, demonic specter had brought him the rifle and commanded he do it. He'd claim that he'd been possessed by the devil. He'd claim his sister had done it, and then he'd shot her. He'd claim his mother had done it and shot herself. He'd claim he'd done it with his sister and his friend Bobby, then change his story yet again.
But the main theory put up by detectives and prosecutors was that Butch had annihilated his entire family alone, which would leave the haunting question that is debated to this day: how could someone go from bedroom to bedroom with a high-powered hunting rifle, firing 9 times without waking up the other members of the family and them trying to escape?
Why were they all lying mysteriously face down? And how hadn't the neighbors heard anything? 9 shots from an incredibly loud hunting rifle? No one reported hearing anything besides the whining howl of the dog.
These mysterious details and the possibility of the supernatural would lead to one of the most famous haunted house stories in the history of the world: the Amityville Horror. And to this day, folks still debate just what the hell happened that night and who were the DeFeos.
Chapter 1. The DeFeos.
The patriarch of the family, Ronald Joseph DeFeo Sr., who went by Big Ronnie because he was 300 pounds and the unquestioned head of the household who ruled with violence, was born on November 16th, 1930 in Brooklyn, New York.
His father, Rocco, was involved with a Genovese crime family, and his uncle Pete was an actual captain in the crime family and one of Vito Genovese's closest associates, with a long rap sheet going back to the 30s, involving everything from murder to illegal kickbacks from a Teamster union pension fund.
As a teenager, Ronald was trim, thin, and very good-looking, with penetrating eyes folks compared to Rudolph Valentino. He was a jock who played basketball and volleyball, and in particular, football, which he had actually thought of making a career out of.
Louise Briganti?
I'm going to say Briganti, because they're very Italian. They're Sicilian. She's Sicilian.
I mean, as a former Quattro Romani, I should know this.
Yeah.
Louise Briganti, just a year younger, was stunningly beautiful and was considering a career in modeling until Big Ronnie came and swept her off her feet.
But Louise's father, Michael Briganti, did not approve of Ronald as a suitor for his daughter.
Ronald was from a bunch of thugs, street-level hoodlums. Michael was a made man on a completely different level, who didn't have to resort to street crime and thuggery. He had class.
Louise's father, Michael Brigante, was connected to Carlo Gambino, head of the Sicilian Gambino crime family, the boss of bosses. They'd been friends since they were teenagers. In fact, the Brigantes and the Gambinos ate Thanksgiving dinner together. So this situation would basically be how Tony from The Sopranos would be if his daughter Meadow hooked up with some low-life street character.
But Louise was in love with the dark-eyed and suave Ronald, and when the young lovebirds, only 19 and 20, got married, the Brigantes completely cut her off.
But on September 26, 1951, Ronald Jr., who'd eventually go by Butch, was born, and the Brigantes, who are now grandparents, renewed their relationship with their daughter and son-in-law.
But Butch wouldn't be the star athlete and scholar that Ronald Sr. envisioned his namesake son to be. As a little kid, Butch was very overweight. It wasn't until he was a teenager and started using amphetamines that he slimmed down. But as a kid in Brooklyn, the other children made fun of him, calling him the Blob, Bucky Beaver, and Pork Chop. And to release his frustration, he'd run in circles until he fell over.
It's kind of funny, dude. Hey, look at Pork Chop running in circles. Little Ronnie was also a bit of a dolt, slow in school and bumbling. And Big Ronnie was a violent man who thought to spare the rod was to spoil the child. And he often beat his firstborn son, even when he was just a little kid, slamming him into walls. And little Butch would then act out in school, causing trouble. Just a whole spiral of dysfunction and violence and misplaced aggression.
5 years after Butch was born, on July 29, 1956, the DeFeos had a daughter, Dawn Teresa. And 5 years after that, another daughter, Allison Louise, born on August 16, 1961. Then, just a year later, on September 4, 1962, Mark Gregory was born.
And by now, Ronald Sr. had lost that trim Rudolph Valentino look that had so captivated a teenage Louise. Now he'd packed on the weight that would earn him the name Big Ronnie, his face going round, his chiseled jaw lost to a double chin. And he'd grown steadily more violent, now taking his frustrations out on Louise for not being a good enough mother.
By 1963, Louise couldn't take it anymore and left Big Ronnie, who was devastated, begging her to come back, pleading, saying he was a changed man and would never beat her again.
And then, this is crazy. Big Ronnie decided to write a song to Louise to lay his heart out for her in the form of music. And he wrote the song,
The Real Thing,
that was actually recorded by jazz musician Joe Williams. The lyrics going,
Love is that certain feeling, when it comes your life has begun. When you fall in love, go all the way, and thank your lucky stars for the day. When you can be sure it's not a fling, then your heart will know it is the real thing.
that was amazing. That was awesome. I don't know if this is
awesome.
Totally awesome. I don't know if this is some Italian thing, a mafia thing, a 70s thing, or what, but writing that song actually worked. And Louise came back to Big Ronnie. And on October 24th, 1965, they had their last child, a son named John Matthew.
Louisa's father, Michael Brigante, owned a Buick dealership in Brooklyn. and he made Big Ronnie the service manager. And Big Ronnie, in turn, hired his son, Butch.
It was a family affair, capiche?
Supposedly, this car dealership was a big front for mob activity. It was used to launder money, strip stolen cars, and there was an industrial melting pot that would be used to destroy evidence, melt down guns that had been used in crimes. The dealership was even used to dispose of dead bodies.
To show how the mob had connections everywhere in the 70s, the dealership also catered to the police, had close ties to various New York City police benevolent societies, and all cops were given a substantial discount. One hand washes the other. They were all good fellas. Know what I mean?
It's said that Big Ron wanted to become a made man, but that Louise's father refused, saying he was too loud and boisterous, especially when drunk, and couldn't be trusted to keep his mouth shut. Resentful, Big Ronnie started skimming money off the books and embezzling.
But when it came to Louise, Michael Brigante absolutely spoiled his daughter. Whatever she wanted, if she ran out of perfume, Michael would send over cases of Chanel right from Paris. If they were running low on beef, a butcher delivered a freezer full of the finest cuts. Whatever she wanted, her powerful mobster father made sure she got. And when she wanted to move out of Brooklyn and into the suburbs of Long Island to raise her children with some class, Michael Brigante put up the money for a house.
Chapter 2, Amityville.
We can do better. We could be chasing dreams. We know what's right, and we know how it feels. Yeah, we can do better. We can make a change for real.
Amityville, which means friendly village, is approximately 35 minutes east of New York City, and at that time boasted a population of 9,000. It is said to be one of the first great American suburbs, and was once the summer home of gangster Al Capone.
On June 28, 1965, 9 years before the murders, the DeFeos bought their home on 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville, Long Island, in one of the nicest neighborhoods in the village, for $30,000.
The house had 6 bedrooms, a living room with the aforementioned sunroom, a kitchen with a breakfast nook, a formal dining room with a patio entrance, and an attic so large it was used as a 3rd floor, and a full livable basement, as well as its own boathouse.
It was the only house on the block whose front door didn't face the road. Instead, the sunroom and the attic, with those iconic windows which looked like creepy eyes, faced the street. The imposing house gazing out.
One of the first things Big Ronnie did was have the iconic High Hope sign made and hang it from the lamppost. And you know, that sign is so iconic. I'm thinking about making one for our house. What do you think of that? Is that too cheesy?
Why can't I picture that right now?
Oh, it's just like a white sign and it says High Hopes in like old English Gothic letters.
Yeah. I just looked it up. Yeah, no, I totally think you should.
Every movie begins with that sign, you know, and then pans up to the eyes in the windows.
Yes. I say do it. Ronnie then began to decorate the house, sparing no expense. Everything top of the line. All new expensive wallpaper, faux wood paneling, oak furnishings, making the basement into a clubhouse with a pool table. Thick shag carpeting everywhere. I'll never understand that shag carpeting.
You ever been to? Oh, you never been to Graceland? And Elvis would put it on the fucking ceiling, dude.
Oh my god, hideous.
I don't know. There's something about it. It's like it looks comfy, you know, on your feet.
I don't know. I think things. We had like, it wasn't really a shag carpet, but we had like a thick pile carpet in my daughter's playroom. And like, if you drop something in it, it's just lost in there forever. So I feel like they're gross.
They're disgusting. I do not have any carpeting in my house whatsoever. We have carpets, we put down and then either throw them away when they're absolutely disgusting from the dogs and the children and everything, or get them pressure washed or something, But yeah, just the carpeting, nah. But this was the 70s. And the neighbors, in particular the more snooty Anglo-Saxon Protestant ones, didn't like the boisterous, loud, very Italian, extremely Catholic family with rumored ties to the mafia coming into their neighborhood. They thought they should have stayed there in Brooklyn where they belonged. One neighbor even telling Big Ronnie so to his face, and Ronnie telling him he ought to have some respect, that his family were very connected to important people, and it sure would be a shame if something bad happened to him.
But Butch, 14 years old now, was unhappy. He missed his friends in Brooklyn, and in particular, he missed his grandfather, Michael Briganti. So he faked his own kidnapping, hoping to gain, I don't know what, just a cry for attention, really. He was found a few days later.
Butch was always trouble, man, this kid. And when his father asked him what color of wallpaper he wanted, Butch said, hey, he didn't care if he put up polka dots. So, just to fuck with him, Big Ronnie put up baby blue wallpaper with orange polka dots.
Hideous. A few years later, they were putting in the heated swimming pool. Very, very extravagant, especially on a service station manager's salary. The rest of the neighborhood taking note, also noticing that Big Ronnie carried a revolver with him.
Then Big Ronnie and Louise decided they wanted family portraits to hang in the staircase. In the grand staircase, even you could call it. And they commissioned a set of life-size portraits at a whopping $75,000. And that's early 70s money. That would be like $500,000 today. It's insane. And of course, Louise's father, Michael, fronted the bill.
Jesus. The portraits are interesting, to say the least. They are extremely lifelike, to the point of almost looking like photographs at first glance.
In one, Big Ronnie and Butch sit smiling, father and son, Butch holding a wine glass, and Big Ronnie filling it for him. Very Italian.
Another shows Dawn and Allison sitting on a love seat together, with an open book between them. Dawn appearing to be teaching Allison a school lesson.
Another shows Mark and John in a pastoral setting, trees in the distance, Mark protectively draping an arm over his little brother's shoulder.
Louise has her own portrait, not sharing the frame with anyone, including her husband. She sits looking very debonair in an upholstered armchair, thin, attractive, blonde, a double strand of pearls around her neck.
And since he was the benefactor who paid for the portraits as well as the house, Michael Brigante's portrait hung in the house as well. He also having his own separate portrait, not sharing the frame with anyone else.
It was happy times. A new life, a huge new house they thought of as a mansion right on the water. High hopes.
Così bella, that's how beautiful you are. Come una giornata soleggiata, gli occhi d'una figlia appena nata. Come il cielo pieno di stelle, penso a tante cose belle.
They got a big sheepdog they named Shaggy, and the children would romp around the yard with him.
Allison loved to draw and put together puzzles. She was always smiling, and they started calling her Happy as a nickname.
Mark was the jock of the family. He excelled at sports, making his father very proud. And John was the adorable baby of the family, cute as could be, with a smile that set everyone's hearts aflutter.
Big Ronnie bought Butch a boat, and Butch would take his siblings out for rides to the bay. Though he was a problem child, Butch was spoiled rotten and got whatever he wanted. In the fall, Butch would go deer hunting in the local forest. Though his eyesight was terrible, he was nearly blind and a terrible shot, to the point where it said he was actually dangerous to go hunting with.
Eldest daughter Dawn was the moody princess. Her room was wallpapered silver with a flower print over it, very modern 70s. She had a nice stereo and a record collection. She's also said to have been the most volatile of the children. Like her father, she was easy to anger and was filled with a dark sense of entitlement. And like Butch in his early years, she too struggled with her weight. She was a large, moon-faced girl, and she too, like Butch, began taking amphetamine pills as a form of appetite depressant.
Everyone was doing that shit in the 70s. You could just go to the doctor and they called them diet pills, and they'd give you speed. I'm sure you read the book or seen the movie Requiem for a Dream.
Hell yeah, that's...
Remember, she's spun on the diet pills.
Mm-hmm.
Just like pure, just methamphetamine.
Yeah. It was a strange family, to say the least. Big Ronnie was kind of kinky. He insisted on putting up mirrors in the bedroom, and he and Louise would have extremely loud sex that could be heard all over the house. And at 300 pounds, he would break the bed, to the point that they stopped using a bed frame and just had the box spring sit on the floor.
Big Ronnie, though he'd sworn to Louise that he'd changed, was still extremely violent, described by some as a, quote, monster. And he was also just weird as hell. He believed he was psychic and could predict the future.
He had a vision that Louise was going to get into a car accident and be beheaded, so he forbade her to drive.
And Big Ronnie was also extremely religious, but in a weird way. At one dinner party with neighbors, Big Ronnie began asking them if they knew which side Jesus had been stabbed on. And he claimed that he knew because he was actually at the crucifixion.
Big Ronnie would pay Butch and his friends to construct religious shrines, including a grotto with a large statue of Jesus near the front of the house.
And Big Ronnie was also preparing for the second coming of Jesus Christ by embezzling from his father-in-law's Buick dealership upwards of $250,000, with plans of moving to Canada, to St. Joseph's Oratory in Montreal for the rapture, a place he'd visited and where he'd had a great spiritual revelation.
After getting into raging, knock-down, drag-out, violent fights with Louise, Big Ronnie would wander out to the grotto at night in his underwear and fall to his knees to pray before the statue of Jesus for forgiveness. Louise, bloody and beaten up, would come out and yell at him, "For God's sake, stop making a scene!"
The neighbors would yell that Louise was acting like a fishmonger's wife, and she'd yell back that they ought to mind their own business. And then Big Ronnie would start yelling that if Louise didn't shut up, he was gonna give her another beating.
Ecco il mio cuore, I'm giving you all my love. Sempre sarai tu il mio amore, my darling, my angel, my dove. If ever you would leave me, I think I would lay down and die. Oh, ecco il mio cuore, now tell me your
Little Ronnie, who at some point started going by Butch as it sounded more macho, was in constant trouble as a teenager. He'd gotten into speed to lose weight, and more drugs soon followed. Weed, alcohol, acid.
Butch was constantly getting into fights. He had horrible grades, he was always skipping classes, and he was eventually thrown right out of Amityville Junior High. The principal driving him home and telling him, "Don't come back."
Then Butch was sent to St. Francis Preparatory School in Brooklyn, a tough, no-nonsense Catholic school. But Ronnie continued to cause trouble and get into fights. He was kicked out of there and ended up repeating the 9th grade at Amityville High.
At Amityville High, Butch's drug use became worse. He discovered heroin, which was the antidote to his use of amphetamine to lose weight, calming him down, chilling him out, but making him grumpy and even more surly, a downward spiral.
The Vietnam War was in full effect, and Big Ronnie, at his wit's end with his troubled son, thought perhaps the military was the answer, and took him to the Bay Shore Draft Board, and he was then taken to Fort Hamilton.
But his grandfather, Michael Brigante, intervened, secretly paying off a psychologist $5,000 to have Ronnie discharged. No grandson of his was going to die in some jungle halfway around the world. Unseemly for a classy made man's grandson.
$5,000 seems really steep to pay off a psychologist, like to just, I don't know. That's
yeah,
wild.
Especially in the, it was like 1970. It was a huge amount of money. It's crazy.
Were you going to say something else?
Oh yeah, I was going to say, isn't this like part of The Godfather? Was that he had joined the army? Remember, that's the whole story. Is Michael had joined the army and he had left the family, and the family didn't like it because they're like, this is your family, not the government. And he comes back like a war hero, and then he, eventually takes over the family business. But
yeah, this story is like so much more than it seems on its surface. And Dawn was supposedly dabbling into drugs as well now, moving from the speed she was prescribed as a weight loss drug into weed and acid.
In the portrait, she kind of looks like a hippie. But, everyone looked like a hippie back then. It was just a look.
She was also supposedly slovenly, leaving chicken wings under her bed and used sanitary napkins hidden in her drawers.
After Butch graduated high school, Big Ronnie considered his namesake son, Butch, his second in command. And he started working at the Buick dealership in Brooklyn full-time, doing odd crimes and chores for his father, delivering items to people, supposedly even bringing ice to the dealership to cover dead bodies in.
Butch had a little crew he hung out with, including Billy Davidge, who started dating Dawn and took her to her senior prom. And Butch's best friend was Robert Kelsky, who went by Bobby.
Bobby Kelsky had been a star athlete in high school, and afterwards did jobs for the Gallo and Colombo's crime families, dropping off money here and there.
There was also August DeGennaro, or Augie, who bragged of being friends with made men in the Gallo crime family.
Butch, Bobby, and Augie and their crew would all hang out in the basement of the house on Ocean Avenue, playing pool, talking shit, and partying. Bobby became such a member of the family that Big Ronnie started including him in some of their crimes, paying him and Butch to take the boat out onto the bay and burn it so that they could cash in an insurance policy.
Hey Adrian, don't forget to bring back some gabagoo.
Leave the gun, take the cannoli.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Chapter 3, Dawn.
Quand je vous aimerai, ma foi, je ne sais pas, peut-être jamais, peut-être demain.
Dawn had been seeing Bobby's friend Billy Davidge, who moved to Florida with his family. After graduating from St. John the Baptist High School, Dawn had started Catherine Gibbs Secretarial School. But she hated it. She wanted to move and go out to Florida, but Big Ronnie forbade it. Billy Davidge would say,
Yeah, Dawn DeFeo was in love with me and wanted to come to Florida to live with me, but her mother and father forbid her from doing so, which led to hostile incidents between Dawn and her mother over all this. Dawn was determined to come to Florida, no matter what.
And Big Ronnie was now just out of control violent. One of Butch's friends, Frank Davidge, described a typical day, saying,
Well, the younger kids were running through the house screaming, and Louise was folding laundry and yelling at the kids to stop and keep it down. And Big Ronnie, sick of all the racket, just walked up to his wife and punched her in the face, knocking her right off her feet and down the stairs. What you gonna do? Forget about it.
And if Big Ronnie thought Butch was disrespecting him in any way, he'd grab him by the throat and shove him against the wall, tell him he wasn't too big to receive a whipping.
When Ronnie got arrested and charged with grand larceny for stealing an outboard boat motor, Big Ronnie beat the living shit out of him, then boasted to the cops about his mob connects.
One neighbor recalls seeing Big Ronnie drag little Allison up the stairs by her hair.
The violence reached the ear of Louise's father, Michael, and Michael sent out a couple goons to the house with a hand-delivered letter saying that if Big Ronnie didn't change his ways, his family was going to find him lying in the gutter.
After that, Big Ronnie swore to change and be a better husband and father. And he built Louise a rock garden as a symbol of his commitment and love. But within a month, he'd gone back to his violent ways and tore the rock garden down.
Butch had always been meek around his father. He had never fought back all the years of being beaten. He'd often just flee the house when his father went crazy, started beating his mother. But in 1973, a change began to come over him.
During one knockdown, drag-out fight while his father was beating his mother, Butch went and got a shotgun, pointed it at his father's head, and said,
I'm gonna kill you, you fat fuck.
And he pulled the trigger.
Somehow, the gun jammed and didn't go off, even though it was loaded.
Wild. Afterwards, Big Ronnie became convinced that he'd been saved by God and became even more religious, building a shrine in his bedroom with votive candles and statues.
And because crime boss Joseph Colombo Sr. was part of the Buick dealership, it was attracting the attention of authorities, and Michael Brigante was thinking of selling the place, which would leave Big Ronnie and Butch without jobs and a place to conduct crime, business, and to swindle from.
Everything was falling apart.
Dawn was spending time at the bar now, drinking and doing drugs, becoming bleaker and more depressed, obsessed with death. She even wrote a bizarre song that is eerily prophetic of what was to come.
Rather than sing it, since it's a little long, I'll read the lyrics. In the sweat of an autumn night, in the land of the dollar bill, the town of Amityville, and they talk about it still. When a man named Butch Capone tried to make that town his own, and we call our punks to war against our parents and their law, I heard my mama cry. I heard her scream, Big Ronnie, we're going to die. I heard her pray the night my family died. Brother, what a night the people saw. Brother, what a plight the people saw, yes, indeed. And the sound of our shots sang through the front and back and side, till the last of the DeFeos cried, and had given up and died. There were crowds in the street and policemen off their beat, and I heard what someone said, that the DeFeos were dead. That is crazy. Like, what?
Yeah. Dawn, we're gonna get... Butch's friend, Augie DeGennaro, but these fucking names, dude. Butch's friend, Augie DeGennaro, will later sign an affidavit stating that Dawn had come to him looking for an untraceable gun she could purchase to kill Big Ronnie with. And she had told Augie that Butch was in on the plan.
On November 1st, 1974, just 2 weeks before the murder, Butch was supposed to take $1,900 in cash and $20,000 in checks to the bank for deposit, but returned saying he'd been robbed at gunpoint.
Big Ronnie, knowing it was a scam, was furious. When police arrived at the dealership, Butch and Ronnie were having a screaming match, and Butch refused to go to the police station and look at mugshots.
Butch was known to have several guns and often carried a pistol. At one point, angry at a tavern owner because he'd fired a waitress friend of Butch's, Butch had sat outside the bar firing rounds into the air.
And according to family friends, Big Ronnie, who had been known to carry a .38 pistol himself, had attempted to confiscate all of Butch's guns. But then Butch went and bought a .35 caliber Marlin hunting rifle.
Then Mark, the star athlete of the family, hurt his back playing football and was unable to walk without crutches, often using a wheelchair to get around. The family was in total shambles.
Butch was on probation for that outboard motor robbery, and his probation officer noticed fresh track marks on his arm. And when he was urine tested, he came up positive for quinine, which was used to cut heroin at the time. And the judge gave probation officers the right to randomly search Ronnie at their own discretion at any time.
And the fights between Dawn and Big Ronnie were reaching new levels. Big Ronnie attempting to strangle his daughter, who broke free and grabbed a butcher knife, saying she was going to kill him. Butch having to break it up, and Dawn later telling him that she was going to kill everyone in the house.
Though he told his friends he was just a chipper, or someone who only used heroin occasionally, it appears Butch was now on the cusp of being a full-on junkie, walking around with visible track marks, and Dawn was getting all into pills, namely Quaaludes, which were notorious in the 70s for causing strange blackouts and bizarre behavior. And, darker still, there were rumors that Butch and Dawn were not only sharing drugs, but sleeping together and engaged in an incestuous relationship. Butch himself reportedly admitting so.
The family seemed to be irretrievably broken and doomed.
Chapter 4, Tuesday, November 12th, 1974.
At some point on the night of November 12, 1974, and the early morning hours of the 13th, all 6 members of the DeFeo family were shot dead with a .35 caliber Marlin hunting rifle Butch had recently purchased, the box for which would be found in his bedroom.
9 shots were fired in all, although one of them may have come from a different gun. The Marlin rifle held only 6 bullets, meaning it had to be reloaded during the killings. And it was an action lever rifle, not an automatic, meaning the shooter couldn't just start squeezing the trigger over and over. Instead, after each shot, the hand lever would have to be pulled down, ejecting the empty shell and inserting a new bullet into the chamber, all of which itself is loud and timely.
The mystery was how the killer had been able to go room to room without waking up the other family members. At first, the police were convinced the family had to have been drugged and slept through the ordeal. But a toxicology report from the coroner found not a trace of drugs in their systems.
So all evidence seemed to point to an accomplice. And there is a lot of direct evidence pointing to this.
While all the bodies were found face down in bed, the trajectory of the bullets indicated that Big Ronnie was shot from a standing position and was then placed on the bed after death. Blood splatter in the hall and on a dresser confirms this.
So Big Ronnie weighed 300 pounds, and Butch would never have been able to lift him up by himself and put him back on the bed without assistance.
One of the 2 bullets used to kill Louise could not be conclusively said to be fired from the Marlin and was suspected to have come from a pistol.
Then there was a military flashlight found in Big Ronnie and Louise's bedroom. So Butch couldn't have been able to aim a rifle and hold a flashlight at the same time.
Other evidence also suggested the family weren't all sleeping peacefully when shot.
Because of Mark's football injuries, he was unable to sleep on his stomach, which means he was most likely ordered to painfully turn over and lay there and wait.
And Allison had been shot through the head in a manner that suggested she'd lifted her head up at the last minute to look around.
We do know for a fact that after the murders, Butch wrapped up all the shells, extra bullets, and bloody clothes, wrapped them in a pillowcase along with the rifle case, drove to Brooklyn for work, and threw them in a sewer. And on the 13th, Butch showed up to work without his father. But that was not unusual because Big Ronnie was often not at the dealership. He was out running his little crime enterprise.
Bobby Kelsky was considered an early suspect and was brought in to be interviewed, but was strangely quickly released, while Butch was denied a lawyer and interrogated for over 30 hours, and he claims he was severely beaten.
A medical examination would show that Butch had been beaten, though police would deny it was them who had given him the multiple bruises and say it was from a fight that he'd had with Big Ronnie. Yet, everyone who saw and talked to Butch on the 13th before he was interrogated, and there was a lot of people, they all say there were no contusions or bruises or marks on him at all.
It just so happens that Newsday had recently published an article about police brutality in Suffolk County, where 93 complaints of police brutality had been filed. The police were notoriously tough and corrupt, many working with the mafia, leading many to suspect this could have been a mafia-related crime that was covered up by the police.
But the mafia was known to never murder children, which seemed to rule that completely out. According to detectives, Butch just caved and started confessing, saying, quote, "It all started so fast. Once I started, I just couldn't stop." According to detectives, Butch called his family fat fucking pigs, said Dawn took too much time in the bathroom, and that his mother's cooking tasted like shit. But there was no signed confession, and the interrogation wasn't recorded. There wasn't even any notes taken.
According to Butch, after refusing to let him see a lawyer or use the bathroom, and being junk sick, detectives put a phone book to his head to stop bruising and beat him with a blackjack until he told them where to find the bloody clothes in the sewer. But he says he never told them where the rifle was located, and in fact didn't know.
Police pointed to a financial motive. Butch was the beneficiary of a $200,000 life insurance policy, and supposedly he stupidly asked the cops when he would be able to cash it in. I don't know if I believe all this shit. You know what I mean? The cops are like, yeah, he said he killed him because his mother's cooking tasted like shit. And you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's wild.
He really said that? Like,
I don't know. I wish I did. It's very mysterious and it drives me nuts. Police claim Butch drew them a map to where the rifle had been thrown into the bay, but this map was never put into evidence, and Butch swears that it was his best friend Bobby who disposed of the gun, and that he didn't even know where it was.
When the rifle was found in the water of the Richmond Avenue dock, it was cocked, leading some to believe Butch had intended to take his own life, but it chickened out.
On October 14th, 1975, Ronald Joseph DeFeo Jr., or Butch, was brought to trial on 6 counts of murder, pleading innocent by reason of insanity. Though the prosecution openly admitted Big Ronnie was most likely shot standing and died in the hall, and that one of the bullets may have come from a pistol, it took the jury only 15 minutes to find him guilty. And on December 4th, 1975, Butch was given 6 sentences of 25 years to life.
Chapter 5. A mystery wrapped in an enigma.
So, just what the fuck happened that night?
Butch gave countless versions, telling his aunt he'd woken in the night to gunshots and had hidden in a crawl space until it was all over. He'd later tell the same aunt that Bobby Kelsky had done the killings. He also implicated Dawn nearly right away. Over the years, he would give all kinds of different scenarios, blaming everyone from the devil to his best friend. In a 1986 interview for Newsday, DeFeo claimed his sister Dawn killed their father, and then their distraught mother killed all of the siblings before he ended up killing his mother.
That's a wild theory. His official version, that he swore to under oath, was that he'd been watching the surreal war film Castle Keep, which came on television at 11 o'clock that night, when he fell asleep, or most likely nodded out, and then, quote,
"Somebody came down there and started kicking me. When I got up, the TV was off. The lamp was off. The room was dark. All I know is somebody was standing there with a rifle in hand, and the hands that the person had were black. I thought it was my sister Dawn. I remember taking the rifle away from her. She seemed to disappear. I remember taking the rifle from there and going into my mother's and father's room with it. I walked in the door and I just started to shoot. The gun did not make any noise. There was no noise in the house. As far as I remember, there were no lights on. And I shot my mother and father. I put the gun down, went back to the sitting room. The next thing, I heard shots going on, gunshots. When I did get up to look, I could have sworn it was my sister that came out of that room and ran up the stairs with a rifle in her hand. I remember seeing Dawn loading the rifle, and I remember fighting with her. I know I wanted to throw her out the window. I got the gun. I remember pushing her down, and I shot her. When I came out of the room, I could have sworn I saw somebody else running. So I run down the stairs. The front door was open. I went out. I saw somebody or something running. Whether it's my imagination or my mind playing tricks on me, I don't know.
This sounds like a version of events from somebody who was high out of their mind. Most likely a combination of Quaaludes and heroin. It's like Sid Vicious talking about the death of Nancy. He doesn't really know what happened because he was blacked out. But it could also be someone pretending to be intoxicated. Is he hiding something?
Louise's father, Michael Brigante, hired a lawyer for Butch, and he also hired a private detective to investigate the murders, a former New York City supervising police detective named Herman Race.
After his investigation, Herman Race claimed he had definitive proof that Butch didn't act alone and that more than one weapon was used.
It said Herman Race uncovered proof that Dawn was involved, and that when he told this to his boss, Michael Brigante, about his granddaughter, the tough mobster began to cry and slid off his chair, saying, "No, no, not my Dawnie. No, no." And after that, the investigation ceased.
Police were actually bugging Michael Brigante because of his involvement in the mafia. And he is on tape saying about his grandson Butch,
"The thing is, if the kid gets acquitted, he could take us all down. He knows a lot of things."
To further complicate matters, it is claimed that the DEA were surveilling the house on Ocean Avenue, as Big Ronnie was receiving shipments of drugs brought in by boat to his boathouse, and that a DEA agent had been watching the house that night, and had seen Dawn come outside with a rifle in her hands and drive off, returning later without the rifle.
But this is pure conjecture. It has never been officially proven or documented. I mean, I don't know. In my opinion, it just seems like more weird bullshit. Who knows? This whole case is a mystery, wrapped in an enigma.
Bada bing, bada boom. The first person to come along and begin to blame the supernatural was Hans Holzer, an Austrian-born paranormal psychologist and author of the book The Ghost Hunter, and in fact nicknamed The Ghost Hunter.
Hans Holzer, he was actually the most famous ghost hunter in the world at the time, and he interviewed Butch in jail while he was awaiting trial. And he says that Butch told him of noises and voices, of things in the house disappearing and reappearing. And he also says that Butch openly told him that he and Dawn were having an incestual sexual affair.
In his book, Murder in Amityville, Hans Holzer would theorize that Butch had been possessed by the spirit of an ancient Native American chief. And we will get into all that in the next episode when we get into the haunting itself. But his claim that Butch and Dawn were having an affair, which was also in the movie Amityville 2, The Possession, which is based on his book, is seen by some as the root of the murders.
So I was talking to this so-called expert on one of the many Facebook groups I joined in doing research for this episode, and he told me, and he did not want me to include his name, so I'm respectfully not including his name. I said, "Can I quote you directly?" And he said no. But he told me that he was friends with several Brooklyn police officers at that time, and they said to him that it was a well-known fact that Butchie and his sister Dawn were sleeping together, and Big Ronnie had recently discovered it. Because of that, he was going to kill the two of them.
Jesus. And Butch would often say that he felt the murders were self-defense, and if he hadn't committed them, he himself would have been murdered.
And now for something completely different. We have a completely different take with researcher and author Rick Osuna, author of The Night the DeFeos Died, reinvestigating the Amityville murders.
The first thing that sets the book The Night the DeFeos Died apart is that it claims that not only did Butch not live there at 112 Ocean Avenue at the time, but that he was married to a woman named Geraldine, and even had a kid with her, and they lived in New Jersey together.
And this is something that Butch had started saying in 1990, when he filed a 440 motion, a proceeding to have his conviction vacated.
In that motion, Butch stated he'd been living in New Jersey with his wife at the time, and that her brother, Richard Raimondo, was with him at the time of the murders. He claims that he and Richard pulled up at the house to see Dawn and another assailant fleeing. He then accidentally killed Dawn in a struggle over the rifle.
And an affidavit from this Richard Ramonde was submitted to the court, but then Richard could not be found to testify in person.
Then evidence was submitted to the court that Richard Raimondo actually did not exist, and that Geraldine was living in upstate New York, married to someone else at the time of the murders.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive. And in 1992, the court secured a statement under oath in which Geraldine admitted that her brother Raimondo was completely fictitious, and that she did not actually marry Butch until 1999 in anticipation of filing the 440 motion.
Like old Butch, Geraldine constantly contradicted herself. In a 1986 interview with Newsday, she said she married Butch in 1974. In Rick Osana's book, she claims they married in 1970. But their 1993 divorce case says that they met in 1985, married in 1989, and divorced in 1993.
Yeah, it's all crazy, but to be fair, Rick Osana puts up a pretty good argument for his theories in The Night the DeFeos Died. And he actually offers a lot of paperwork as proof. And regardless of whether or not Butch was married to this woman, the telling of the actual murders in the book is extremely interesting and revealing, especially if you just kind of read between the lines and try to figure it out.
The version of the killings in the book, The Night the DeFeos Died, which Rick claims was told to him directly by Butch. Butch was with his wife and child at home in New Jersey when he received a phone call from his mother that Dawn and Big Ronnie were fighting and he had to come and break it up.
Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in.
Butchie came to the Amityville house to find utter pandemonium. His little brother John, the youngest, was beat up on the floor crying. Big Ronnie was beating Louise and had ripped her blouse so that her breasts were exposed. Dawn was in the upstairs hall yelling down at them, "You motherfuckers! You all no goddamn motherfuckers! I hate you all!" And Mark in his wheelchair was yelling, "What is happening?" All while sweet little Allison was quietly putting puzzles together.
In the book, it's claimed that Big Ronnie had already cut Butch's brake lines, basically attempting to kill him, and that it was this big fight that put Butch over the edge. And Butch then conspired with both his best friend Bobby and his sister Dawn to commit the murders.
In this version, it wasn't Butch nodding out on the sofa by himself watching Castle Keep on Channel 5 that night, but also Dawn, Bobby, and Augie, all getting high and drinking. And it was Dawn that convinced the others to kill her parents.
In the original plan, just the parents were going to be killed. The kids were going to be spared and taken to their grandparents after the killings, which were going to be blamed on a robbery gone wrong.
Supposedly, Augie was sent outside as a lookout, and Dawn went into Mark and John's room to tell them to stay in bed, that someone had broken into the house, and to just remain there and be calm.
Meanwhile, Butch took his new Marlin rifle and went upstairs as Bobby, armed with a Colt Python pistol, used a military flashlight to guide them through the eerie darkness, past the weird life-size portraits, and up to the bedroom.
But Butch, aiming the gun at his sleeping father as Bobby held the flashlight, just couldn't bring himself to do it. And suddenly Dawn appeared, taking the gun from him and shooting their father in the back.
Then Butch took the gun from his sister and shot his mother in the face just as she started to rise up, literally clutching her pearls.
But Big Ronnie wasn't dead and managed to start pushing himself up and staggered after Butch, who backed into the hall before shooting his father again. This time, a lethal blow. Big Ronnie collapsing half in the hall and leaving blood splatter on the doorframe.
And Louise wasn't dead yet either, and she began to yell. And it was actually Bobby who delivered the death shot to Louise with his Colt Python. And that was the bullet that was too disfigured to identify.
Horrified by what he'd done, Bobby then ran out of the house in a panic.
Butch then told Dawn, who was singing and dancing about like a Manson girl, to take the younger kids and drive them to Brooklyn, while he went out and tried to find Bobby and calm him down.
Butch returned an hour later to find Allison, John, and Mark all dead in their beds, apparently killed by Dawn, who then charged at Butch with the rifle.
Butch managed to wrestle the rifle away from her, threw her into her bed, and shot her, enraged that she'd gone against the plan and killed their younger siblings.
Butch then had Bobby help him move the body of Big Ronnie onto the bed, laying him face down over the sheets. Then, in some weird act of kindness, went and tucked the blankets around his mother. He made an also weird half-effort to clean, scrubbing blood off his sister's headboard, gave the rifle to Bobby to dispose of. And Bobby is the one who threw it in the river, and the one who told the police where it was.
Now, do I believe that when Butch went to shoot his father, he just couldn't bring himself to do it, and it was Dawn who jumped in and did the deed? Hell no. That sounds ridiculous. But parts of this theory do ring true. In particular, to me, that Bobby was involved, which would explain why Bobby just charged into the house later with no fear that there could be a gunman inside, seemingly already knowing that the DeFeos were dead in their bed. All that seems very suspicious to me.
And there was a military flashlight there on the chair. How could Butch hold a flashlight and aim a rifle at the same time? Someone was holding the light.
It also explains the one bullet that wasn't identifiable, and supposedly the Colt Python pistol that Bobby used to kill Louise, as well as some other bloody clothes, were brought to the Buick dealership and melted down. Was Bobby involved? I mean, fuck if I know. But they were supposedly best friends who did everything together. And he was a suspect from the very beginning. It's all very fishy.
And was Dawn as complicit as Butch claims?
You know, I have stared into the portrait of Dawn, looking into her eyes and asking myself if she was a murderer, if she was capable of that, this 18-year-old girl. I don't know. Here's what we do know. Facts.
Dawn had gunpowder residue on the shoulder of her nightgown, seemingly indicating that she had fired a rifle.
And this is really interesting right here. The coroner stated her rigor mortis was not complete, seeming to indicate she had been killed 3 to 5 hours after all the others.
But in the book, Mentally Ill in Amityville, author and investigator Will Savvy does a rigorous examination of the gunpowder residue, interviewing experts, and comes to the conclusion that it most likely came from the muzzle when she was shot.
And that her body's rigor mortis was around 4 hours behind the rest of the victims does seem to indicate that she was murdered much later than the others. But, you know, this doesn't necessarily brand her a murderer.
In the end, it's a mystery for the ages. And of course, there's those that blame the supernatural, saying it could be ghosts or demons.
But to hear those theories, you're going to have to tune in next week as we get into the most famous haunting in the world, the story of the Lutz family and the Amityville Horror House.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you're having a wonderful spooky season.
And you got a case you want us to cover, let us know. And do you have any information that you think we should know about this or anything else? Please drop us a line at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. We will see you next week for more Amityville Horror Madness.
Thanks so much, and see you then.